Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today. We will get started in about 30 seconds or a minute. Let some more folks come in. Okay, so welcome everyone to today's educational session entitled CEnR Presents Advancing Wellness and Healthcare Veterans Through Research. The CEnR team is really thrilled to have everyone here today. The team is made up of Paula Moody, project manager, Jen Poger, director of program and education, and myself, Jess Schrodel, who's also a project manager for the CEnR team. CEnR is the Community Health Equity and Engagement and Research Team. It's a mouthful, so that's why we call it a CEnR. And basically, our work is really revolving around bringing a lens of equity to underrepresented and under recognized communities in the Pennsylvania region. Today's session is part of a three-part mini-series that we've had. Today's the third of the three sessions. The first one we did was back in April about the Amish community. Then we moved on to pregnant women. And today we're thrilled to share with you research work with veterans. We are really honored and thrilled to welcome two leaders in the field to be our guest presenters, Dr. Mark Stevens and Dr. Daniel Perkins. Mark Stevens, MD, is Associate Dean for Medical Education, Professor of Family and Community Medicine, and Professor of Humanities at the Penn State University College of Medicine and State College, PA. Prior to joining the faculty at Penn State, he was professor and chair of the Department of Family Medicine at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. He has a certificate of added qualifications in adolescent medicine. Dr. Stevens' professional interests include rural health, physician wellness, exercise medicine, and the use of arts humanities in medical education. Daniel F. Perkins is a professor of family and youth resiliency and policy at the Pennsylvania State University. He is director of an applied research center, the Clearinghouse for Military Family Readiness at Penn State. The Clearinghouse is an interactive, knowledge-based platform for helping professionals working with military families to support their program's implementation and assessment activities. Dr. Perkins has been designing and evaluating strengths-based family and youth development programs in 4-H and cooperative extension and leading complex projects for more than 20 years. In addition, he is also an affiliate faculty member of the Prevention Research Center for the Promotion of Human Development. So welcome both Dr. Stevens and Dr. Perkins. We can't wait to listen to your experiences and what you're going to be sharing with us today about your work with veterans. Just a few housekeeping issues before we get started. The presentation is being recorded. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand at any time or use the chat feature. We really try to encourage this to be a very an opportunity to share with one another and really learn from one another. The presentations will be shared, the presentation materials will be shared post-session. So you will get a copy of this video included in that and all of the resources that we will be mentioning as well today. So the agenda is packed today. We have a really full session for you. First, we're just going to quickly go over who are veterans, some statistical information about them. Dr. Stevens is then going to present a life of service. Then we will look a little more into some information regarding veterans in research. And from that point, Dr. Perkins will be talking about data from the Veterans Metrics Initiative and the Veterans Engaging in Transition Studies post 9/11 veterans. We'll then open up for questions and answers from the audience and finally round out our day with resources to share. Our learning goals and objectives for today, participants will understand the unique needs and interests of veterans in research. Participants will learn from real-world research projects involving veterans, and participants will learn about ways to best serve the veterans community. So just for a few minutes, I just want to go over this slide before we turn it over to our wonderful first guest speaker, Dr. Stevens. Who are veterans? When we're mentioning veterans, most of us are familiar with the 5 branches of the U.S. military: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. Today, there are 18 million living veterans in the U.S., representing about 6% of our country's adult population. 43% of those folks served in the Gulf War era in the late 80s and 90s. 30% served in the Vietnam War era from the 1950s to the 70s. And about almost 1 million veterans who served during World War II and the Korean conflict are alive today, making up about 5% of all veterans. So with that being said, I'm thrilled and honored to turn it over to Dr. Mark Stevens, who's going to talk about a life of service.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks, Jennifer, Paula, and it's really great to be here with you today with my dear friend, really good friend, Dr. Danny Perkins. So, Danny, great to be here with you. I'm gonna do something maybe just a little bit different. If you don't mind, I'm just gonna say next slide and tell you what I'm aiming to do. So I'm in a phase of my life where I'm really enjoying writing poetry. And one or two of you, I think, in the audience may have been to a session or two where I've written poems in the context of an academic setting. And as we talked about the goals and objectives for today, and really it's all about how do you include veterans in your research programs. I thought I would write you a poem, and that's what I've chosen to do for you today. So if you'll bear with me, this poem is for you. Next slide. From frozen chosen's brutal sting, where courage wore a threadbare wing, to jungles green, a fiery haze, where youthful hope met brutal days. From desert storms' swift thunderous might to city streets in Fallujah's night. Through dusty tracks where ordnance hides and distant drones where shadows glide, across the years a soldier's stride. Desert, jungles, tundra, where brothers and sisters died. Next slide. Vietnam's whisper, a haunting plea, a war that fractured you and me. The first Gulf's rush, a desert bloom, then echoes in a silent room. Iraq's inferno, burning sand, weapons held with wind-swept hands. Afghanistan's peaks, so stark and high, beneath a never-ending sky. And whispers now of conflicts new. The world keeps turning and fighting too. Next slide. I carry the burden, seen and unseen, the weight of what has always been, the camaraderie, a fierce, authentic embrace, a bond that time cannot erase. But then the uniform, it disappears, replaced by anxieties and fears. The structured days, the clear command, dissolve like footprints in the sand. Back home in Pennsylvania's fold, my story is often left untold. In rural towns where silence sleeps, the memories our veterans keep. The isolation, the quiet fight against the demons of the night. The VA's maze, a tangled thread, a promise whispered, sometimes dead. The job applications cold and stark, a missing skill, a question mark. In urban sprawl, you can go next slide. In urban sprawl, the noise and speed can amplify a buried need. The siren's scream, a sudden burst, can trigger ghost, a memory cursed. The faces blur a hurried pace, a world blazing by, a different race. Affordable housing, hard to find, a struggling spirit left behind. The judgment whispered, sometimes loud, lost in the anonymity of the crowd. The flashbacks flicker, sharp and real, the wounds that time cannot quite heal, the hypervigilance, a constant hum, expecting threats that never come. The sleepless nights, the heavy sighs, a silent scream that climbs the sky. the feeling lost, adrift and strange, a disconnect, a landscape change. So why, you ask, would one like me, weathered by wars and ill at ease, engage in research, lend my voice, help to make a different choice? Because our stories hold a truth beyond the headlines of our youth, because the data cold and bare can't capture what it's like to bear the weight of service day by day in civilian life, trying to find my way. We've seen the systems, felt the strain, the gaps where healing can't attain. We know the questions that need asked, the barriers that continue to outlast. We have a wisdom hard won, deep, secrets that our weary hearts still keep. Community, a word that calls to break down isolating walls. Participatory research hand in hand to shape the future of our land. Scholars who listen, who truly hear, help to validate our silent tears. We want to shape the policies, to mend the fractured legacies, to build a bridge strong and wide where veterans can walk with pride, to share our struggles not in vain, to ease the suffering and the pain of those who follow in our stead, to plant a seed where hope is bred. So listen close when we step near. Our voices hold a truth so clear. We are the veterans standing tall, wanting to help, to give our all, to build a future strong and bright, and bring our hard-won wisdom to light.
Wow. That was really amazing. I think I probably speak for everybody here today, that was absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for using such a beautiful way of sharing that incredible message, Dr. Stevens. Thank you so, so much for that. And I know many of you might be thinking I would like to ask Dr. Stevens some questions about his presentation and its content, and we will be getting to that after we have our next wonderful presenter share with us about his experiences specifically in research. Before we go over to Dr. Perkins, I did want to share some information to set the context for veterans in research. Veterans have significantly impacted various fields of research throughout history. They have been very important in medicine, engineering, social sciences, just to name a few. And they leverage a really unique experience and perspective that they can bring to the research field. Interestingly, despite the fact that the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, has been able to really advance many healthcare and research initiatives, they have not been able to eliminate the racial and ethnic disparities that are also seen in folks who are non-veterans in the general public. So the VA has not been able to try to quite eliminate racial and ethnic disparities at this point. And as the largest healthcare system in the nation, the VA offers a unique opportunity to understand the complex reasons why these disparities exist and how we can improve wellness in underrecognized communities. The VA also offers an ideal setting in which to develop and evaluate patient-centered and culturally sensitive approaches to care. So with that being said, and hopefully setting the context a little bit for Dr. Perkins, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jess. Let me just start. First of all, um, a little, not a little, moved by Mark's poem. First of all, amazing gift um, in the ability to put words together and describe something that I've been studying for the last 10 years, and I don't think I could have ever described it better. So it's quite a moving experience. So tribute to Mark. For those of you who don't know Mark, and I'm pretty sure I can say this, you can call Mark, you can call me Danny. We don't need to be called doctor. We know who we are. My mother would tell you I'm not a real doctor because I can't cut anyone open legally. Mark is a real doctor, so we'll just leave it at that. So we'll start there. I hope to give you some sense of our veterans that are post 9/11, an experience for those of you who are roughly, most of us have an experience of 9/11 and its impact on us growing up. I come to this work, and I'll just say this, I did not serve, but I had a father who joined the Army at age 16, and I think it has forever shaped me and my thinking. And so I believe it's important to know that. So as real quick, you heard about us at the Clearinghouse. This is a shameless pitch. If you want to learn more, you go to the website. We do a lot of different things. I'm not going to spend time on that. We're moving to the next slide, please. Out of work we've been doing since 2015, as part of the Clearinghouse, we developed a group called the Veteran Evaluation and Research Applications Network. This is a subpage within the Clearinghouse that is all about veterans, all about research being done on veterans, and has really guided us towards a fairly significant arm of our work for the veterans in the U.S. And so what I'll spend today talking about is really focused on this, but I just want to let you know that's another website you can go to and learn more about. We're going to move on to the next. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about today, and by the way, I should have said this, so please forgive me for not saying it at the beginning. Thank you, Mark, for your service, your family service. Thank you, anyone on the call who has served. Appreciate it. I know that Mark feels the same way, and I'm sure many people do. So we'll leave it at that. But it is heartfelt. So I'm going to spend some time talking about data. I'm really jazzed up about this data. I'm probably too jazzed up about it, so I accept that. Please, I won't get through everything. I'm not worried about that. This basically is a graph that shows you what data we collected. We followed, to start with, we took from 50,000 veterans roughly getting out of the military in fall of 2016. We asked 50,000, would you be willing to participate in a study? We had almost 10,000 say yes. They got out within a 3-month period. So we are the first study to get veterans at the point of transition. We then followed them. The first 6 waves, we followed them every 6 months and collected more data than we've been able to use, and we continue to mine it. That was done with colleagues, 3 colleagues at the VA, although this was not a VA study. So these individuals that we followed did not necessarily interact with the VA, although many of them did, of course. Then we finished the study, but we wanted to keep going on because the funders, we had 13 private foundations fund this work, and they were disappointed, quite frankly, in the outcome of this study. They didn't think they got enough for their money. I'm not sure they're wrong. So I'm not one to take that news very well, if you know me. So I said, okay, we're going to keep looking at this data. If people want to join us every month to dig in, do that. That worked really well. We had 2 funders later on say, hey, we want to fund a wave 7. So we funded another wave 2.5 years after, or 2 years after wave 6 during the middle of the pandemic. Kind of cool. And then lastly, we had 4 funders chime in and fund a wave 8. And we are now in conversations with 3 funders to fund a wave 9, which is really interesting. So that's to all say, you're not going to remember all these time periods. I'll try to make sure I bring them up, but I wanted to give you a background of the data we're looking at. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a slide. I don't expect you to read it. This is available on that Veteran Network website. It's what is the typical veteran that we have in our data set. You can learn a lot from it. I will say, going back to Mark's amazing poem, I wouldn't call it a poem. I would call it a life story, quite frankly. But if you took that life story and put it in the hands of an enlisted person getting out as an E4, enlisted pay grade 4, which is fairly young, not like Mark was old, but he was older and had much more experiences, right? It's going to look, that life story will have different parts to that poem, and we need to own that. What you can understand, and you need to try to understand that, is veterans in general aren't necessarily Mark's age. They're variety. There is no monolithic veteran, and we're going to get to that. I'm going to move on. I want you to know this is there. You can access this. Happy to talk more about it. Another shout out. We have, for the first time, as far as I understand, defined what successful military to civilian transition looks like. Do I think it's a perfect definition? Absolutely, unequivocally not. I'm not even sure we got to 50%. I'm hoping we did, but I'm not sure. But encourage folks to look at this. What we've tried to do is really understand, what does it mean to say successful transition? We think you have to start talking about well-being domains rather than, oh, you're successful. No, or you may be successful in some domains and not in others. We think it's really important that the voice of the veteran plays out in what successful is. So our measure does that, I think, to some degree. Encourage you. We worked with folks from Syracuse and with folks from Carnegie Mellon University to create this sort of concept. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to get to some data and have some fun. So this is unusual data. This was data, and I'll just say it, we did for Pew Charitable Trust. We went down to DC in November, talked to some staffers and some representatives on the Hill about veterans. And what we wanted to do with this data was try to get them to stop thinking of a veteran as a monolithic entity. It's a really bad way to define someone, a veteran, because there's a lot of variety in that term. And we need to think through that if we're going to. Okay, next slide. And then so what we did was, we said, let's pull out 3 examples, real life examples from our data. And let's just take education and work, see what it looks like. And the reason we did that is RAND has a report from last summer, where they show that out of the $13.6 billion being spent on veterans benefits, not health, leaving health out of it for a moment, 11.2% is spent on education, and the rest is spent on lots of different things, some of which is employment prep. You heard in Mark's poem this notion of civilian transition, or military to civilian transition. Part of that might very well be and should be employment. We're pretty sure that he even talked about that as they look for employment. This is one example of a journey map. What I want you to see from this, the bottom of the journey map, the waves are, remember, we have 8 waves of data over 6.5 years when a person gets out, all the way to 6.5 years later. What do we see? Well, this is a white male who's 26 years old, separated as an E5, pay grade E5, okay? What do we know about this person? Well, they got out, they enrolled, and they stopped at wave 3. So about at 15 months, they dropped out of school for a period of time. We have more information about why, but we won't get to that right now. Then they re-enrolled. Then they dropped out. Then they enrolled in a certificate program. They never actually got their degree. And 6.5 years later, after a pandemic, we have them working full-time and enrolled on the job training apprenticeship. And they were successfully transitioned in the social domain by wave 8. Now you may say, what does that mean? Just know that generally they had people to turn to talk to felt supported and felt loved. So that's good, right? We pulled out those that didn't. Okay, next slide. Here, I'm ready to do that. Okay, journey map 2. This is real data. I didn't make any of this up, folks. Journey map 2, Hispanic females who is 43, almost 40, 43 years old, separated as an E6, pay grade E6 from the Navy. What happens? She gets out, immediately enrolls in a bachelor's, okay? Doesn't graduate, then re-enrolls, stays enrolled in that bachelor's, does graduate by wave 6, so takes a break at wave 5. So wave 5 is about 2 years out, roughly. Takes a break for 6 months, but then is back in and graduates, right? But above, you'll see by the end of wave 4, the end of that, just about 2 years, this woman takes a full-time job. Okay. So what were we trying to do? Again, you see, it's not monolithic. Next one. This is a white male who is 31, basically, separated as an E6 from the Army, enrolled in a bachelor's. That within 3 months of separating, then 6 months later, or I should say 6 months later, yeah, they're full-time employed. They drop out of school for a bit, and they're back enrolled in a bachelor's by about 15 months. And then they finish that in wave 4. So wave 4 is roughly I think roughly almost 2-year mark. I'm not sure. And then they jump right into a master's program. Okay, wave 7 is the pandemic. And now they're employed the whole time since wave 2. And now they're jumping into an online certificate program. This is a couple examples here. So the whole point of this data is to say, we got to stop thinking of, first of all, a monolithic veteran. Second of all, a monolithic trajectory. If we were to just look at employment, we would say, oh, this person got out and was looking for a job for a while. No, they were engaged in education. And then they found a job, and then they took a break from education, went back. So it's really not as clear-cut as a linear. This really is an interactive, iterative process going on, this military to civilian transition. Next slide. Okay. I wanted to give you some good news because I'm afraid we spent a lot of time talking about the broken veteran. And I don't think that's true always. Of course, they have challenges. We all have challenges. Let's look at some things that are good to see. So what do we have? Comparison of the TVMI, the veteran metrics data that I just talked about, with the National Center of Educational Statistics. And a lot moving parts here. I'm just going to, the story's relatively the same no matter which group you're looking at. So I will pick on the second set of 3 columns. And you see the red of that 55% participants aged 25 plus with a bachelor's degree or higher at wave 1. Wave 1 is right as a veteran gets out, right? The second column is those TVMI participants age 25 plus with a bachelor's degree or higher by almost 3 years out, wave 6, right? Okay. And then you see the typical U.S. civilian, age 25, who completed a bachelor's degree or higher in waves in 2016. So the takeaway is, in general, the military is an opportunity to get an education. There's no other way to see it. In fact, when we ask folks why they went in the military, we see a large percentage saying because they wanted to get an education. So that's important data to see, very positive, something we should say thank you to the military and to the service members that do that. Next slide, really important. Please keep me track on time because if I'm over, I won't know, I promise you. Okay, now we see this. This is the fun. I like this one. There's one more slide on this, but we'll start with this one, right? Veteran civilian home ownership comparison by age 2016. This is right as folks are separating from the military. And we've done it by age, right? Not, slight, there's differences here, right? And remember look at your sample sizes. I would feel very comfortable saying these are these are statistically significant differences. What do you see? Veterans are more likely to either be having a mortgage or own their home compared to their civilian counterparts. That's what it says. Now let's go a little further. Next slide. I think it's in there. Yeah. So now we're at wave 8. Remember, we've been following these folks for 6.5 years, and you really start to see a widening of that gap in the sense of veterans are much more likely, if you will. So again, very positive. I want you to hear that. There's some positive impacts here. Next slide. Okay, I want to spend time on this. I really love this. This was fun. Next slide. And the reason I love this wasn't my question. One of the funders for Wave 8 said, I want to know, because I keep getting asked, how long it takes for a veteran to transition. I said, okay, that's a great question. Let's figure out how to ask some of the questions to get a sense of that. So we start at wave 8. Remember, this is 6.5 years later. We're asking them to be retrospective. So I there's limitations there. We all know them. Still, big takeaways here. Over 50% are with basically less than 2 years have fully transitioned. They believe they have fully transitioned. Right? Concern, the red, 19%, 6.5 years later, do not feel fully transitioned. Now, next slide. Then we wanted to say, well, what might play out here? What do we see here going on? Well, we wanted to look at different parts of this. We're going to get to a summary, I hope, but you can see this, right? Folks with no disability rating, VA disability rating, which by the way is very convoluted, is not something that's easily understood. I still don't understand it. No disability rating, you're at 49% say they fully transition within a year. That drops down every time you add disability rating. So clearly there's something disability rating is capturing. Want to see that. You also see folks not fully transitioned going up for each level of disability rating. Next slide. Okay. Just want to look at some of this. Again, food for thought here. We're not going to get to all the answers here. In fact, probably no answers, which is what I love about my job. You just keep asking questions. But what do we see here? We see some differences, at least by race. If we were to look at gender, you would see even more differences playing out where females are more likely to be struggling. I'll just say it that way. Next slide. Okay, so that was really quick. You can tell I'm trying to keep to the time frame. So we were asked by that funder, and then we were asked by folks on the Hill, okay, so what should we expect? And our answer based on all this data, not just that, some other data too, that first paper I gave you about what was successful transition was, in general, on average, we can expect most veterans to take 3 years to transition. Because we see in our data, we don't get to 65% of veterans saying they fully transition and their use of support programs dropping to a very lower level until 3-year mark. So that's really important. So we defined it. And I have to say that folks on the Hill were kind of excited that they had now. I'm not saying it's the right type of thing, but it's something. However, big caveat, we still have that almost 20% that haven't made that transition. And they need a different level of support. If you want to learn more about this, we have these briefs on that web page. I wanted you to see that. You can see that. You can see it. Next slide. So I'm almost done. Here we are. Major theme. All that is to say there's a lot of information. I want you to walk away, if nothing else. If you hear the word veteran, you've got to say, okay, well, what are we talking about? We talk post 9/11? Are we talking young? Are we talking female, male? Are we talking combat experience, ACEs experience? We find in our data, those kind of factors are what create the quote unquote veteran and their experiences as they make the transition from military to civilian, right? The last thing I want to show you, I think there might click it. If I'm wrong, it goes to a new page. Don't go further, but don't click on that. Sorry. For those of you that are, yeah, here we go. For those of you that are service providers, we were lucky enough in our conversations with the funders that hung out with us post that original Wave 6 and followed us, stayed with us for a long time. We got funding to create what we call the Veteran Transition Screener. And what I love about this is it's online, it's totally free, and literally, if you're a provider, whether you're just providing, say, employment programs, you might, or help, yeah, we'll start with employment programs. You could literally get online, set it up, very easy to set up, and send the veteran. If Mark was the veteran, I'd send Mark this and say, hey, you contacted us about working with us. Can you complete this? Get information back on Mark on the risk that he has in the employment domain that I need to pay attention to as the provider. So we have used this data to create a screener that allows individuals to understand the tailored needs of the veteran. And that data is by domain, so you don't have to ask all the questions. You would ask based on what you are able to provide. If you're doing health, we have a health section. So I encourage you to check it out. It's free. It's already paid for. It literally spits out a personalized report on that veteran so that the service provider can support that veteran. It's like personalized medicine, if you will, in that sense. Encourage you to go there, check it out. If you have questions, happy to answer them. I think the next slide is thank you. Well, these are our funders, a really wild group of folks, fun, much smarter than me. And I think I really have to say all the questions we've answered in the last 8 years are totally from them because they're the ones asking the practical questions to get eggheads like me to get off our tuckus and figure out how to answer some questions. So I think the next slide is how to contact me. There we go. Back to you, Jess.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Danny. That was really informative, and I think such an important message regarding, your findings with veterans and how important it is to personalize the care and the resources that are needed for individuals. I think that's such an important message that I had never considered that before, and it's just really valuable to know that. I'm just wondering, let me turn it over now to questions and answers, and we can have a few questions maybe if folks have them in the chat, or you can raise your hand.
There is one question in the Q&A. Are the paths different based on discharge status?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. We do have discharge status. All those folks, those 3 pathways, which were 3 individuals, were honorably discharged. Thank you for asking that. And the path, but to further that, if you were to look at dishonorable discharge, the pathway would look different. We certainly have seen that is a predictor of challenges. And I have a lot more data, but I wanted to be mindful of time. Jess was very clear that if I go over, she's just shut me down. So I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. But yes, we see that. We see the age of folks getting out. For example, if you are not if you're an E1, 2, or 3, Mark would know this. Some of you may know it. That suggests that probably you didn't do too well in the military if you got out at one of those pay grades. Generally, you're going to get out in general, most of the time as an E4 at the lowest pay grade, generally. So that's a little bit of a sign of an issue.
Thanks, Danny. And I would never cut you off. I'm just letting everybody know I wouldn't do that. We appreciate too much your expertise. So thank you. I don't see any other questions right now in the chat, but I did see from Rebecca. Oh, is there another question, Jen?
Yes, there are a few questions coming into the chat now,
Oh,
and there is
fantastic.
more in the Q&A. So in the chat, Rebecca was especially interested in how the arts can help with the transitions back.
I'll give you the data respect, but I also want Mark to chime in on his experience with some of the work he's doing, because I know he's done some really interesting stuff around arts, and I'll put arts in quotes just to make sure everyone understands I'm using a broad definition. In our, one of our funders, very small funder, but nonetheless a funder, was the National Endowments of the Arts. And we looked specifically within our data. Our data has, which I didn't present at all. Our data has some really interesting information on different types of program components folks used as they got out. And so we do have some information of folks who note they use some art and humanities programs, if you will, not in that language, but that's basically it. What we find is, in fact, we do not see much on that issue. And I think it's partly, to be fair, it's partly our numbers weren't huge first. And second of all, I think you really would have to dissect that as to what the individuals were attempting to gain from their interaction with that program, if you will. I'd like to turn, Mark, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I think you should share a little bit about your masking effort, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks. Hopefully everybody can see I changed my background, so I hope that's visible to the group. I also threw a link in the chat, Rebecca. If you want to click on a really interesting look. So I'm going to narrow it down to identity, and the work that I am really interested in is changes in identity that happen around time on active duty, in the transition, and then time as a civilian. And so what I see in if you click on the, revealing the trauma of war, the Walter Reed is the National Military Medical Center. Danny and I have collaborated on studies there at Walter Reed. They actually have something that's called the National Intrepid Center of Excellence there, or NICO. And it really was designed probably now close to 20 years ago, when we were very actively involved in Iraq and Afghanistan with a lot of what we call polytrauma veterans coming back, severely injured warriors with multiple amputations, traumatic brain injury, PTSD. And so a comprehensive approach to their care at NICO. And one of the pieces to that is actually art therapy. And the work I do, I have to tell you, I am not an art therapist. I am a reflective expressivist. And there's a very important difference. So I don't do work from a diagnostic standpoint, but I do work from a healing standpoint. And all credit to my friend Melissa Walker. She's the art therapist down there at Walter Reed. But we started exploring what does identity look like. And if you see, I'm going to stop this now, and I'm going to hold up a mask in front, and hopefully you can see my mask now. We all have an outside that we show the world. And we call this a projected or aspirational self. But we also have, it's harder to see this one maybe. There it is. We also have an inside, which is what we might call a true or actual self. And so some of the work, Rebecca, that I'm really interested in, and this is not unique to veterans, this is a human experience, is what are your changes in identity as you go through varying life changes. Right now, I do a lot of this with medical students. And if you talk to medical students and you say, how are you doing? One of the things you'll hear is fake it till you make it. In other words, when they go into the hospitals, they have an aspirational self that they feel that they need to uphold. And that's not authentic. And so the further the space between your aspirational self and your authentic self, we call that identity dissonance. So you're not feeling whole. And that really leads, I think, to some of the things that we see in these transitional spaces with veterans, dealing with, in particular, things like depression, anxiety, and so forth. So great question. I was thrilled to hear that in the chat. Danny and I for years have talked about how do we do this. And I'm really proud to say that every year Huge McFeely runs the Vet Center here on campus. So all new incoming veterans, it's really hard at Penn State for veterans to become students. I mean, it's really hard for them. So we do mask making every year with the incoming Penn State veteran students and have open conversations about this transition and normalizing all of these dissonant things that you may be feeling.
And just to add one thing to that, as we look at wave 9, one of our questions is going to be about asking veterans whether or not they feel like they've fully figured out their identity to the point, and try to link that to some of the data we have. And partly credit to Mark. Mark's pushing on this notion of identity and the importance of it. It's just really, it is critical.
Thank you both, Mark and Danny, for explaining about the mask making and its use in identity dissonance. What a interesting, and I think as you both acknowledged, that such an important topic for anybody, you know, as human beings in general, veterans, medical students, anyone. So thank you for that. Do we have any additional questions? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time keeping up with the chat.
Yeah, no worries, Jess. So there is another question in the chat. Do they plan on building more VA hospitals and clinics for better access?
I'll speak only for myself and add something that's above my pay grade. I would say that the current context doesn't indicate there'll be a lot of expenditures on that, but I could be wrong. I would also say that, and I didn't present this today, we have one of the things we've done a lot of is what are barrier reductions to using services, including like employment services or whatever. And one of the areas we looked at was health services. And we do find, I don't think you folks will be at all surprised that there are some barrier reductions. The most common that we find in our data that seems to really make a difference of whether people are going to utilize services has to do with transportation being provided, telehealth being provided, and maybe this one is a mentor coach to support the use of those services. Because again, we know that to some degree there is a help-seeking dearth among military connected individuals. They're less likely necessarily to feel that it's appropriate for them to seek help, at least in the data that we see. So I don't know that I answered your question totally, but to the best of my knowledge, I answered it. Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for this, because I think the short answer is no. But I think, in the context of access, that's a really interesting question. In the first response, I wanted to focus on identity, and in this response, I want to focus on trust. I feel like in my experience working with, in particular, rural veteran communities, there is what can be, when engaging with academia and research, sometimes a lack of trust. These folks have been poked and prodded their entire military life without a choice. You sort of sign the contract, and then you have to do these screenings. You have to do this blood work. It's just part of the way it goes. And then when however well intended, we as academicians go into communities expecting that folks will just allow us to collect data to poke and prod without getting to know them, without establishing trust, it can be a pretty short conversation. So I think that's particularly true in rural veterans, but probably that's true in the urban veteran community as well. So I don't think they're going to be building more clinics. I just don't see brick and mortar as happening, but I do see telehealth. I do see mobile outreach as really being a nice way forward. But just remember, you got to have, without the Marines, when you graduate, you get a sword, and the side of the Marine Corps sword says earned, never given. So you earn the right to be called a Marine. And I would say the same thing about trust. Trust is earned. It's really never given.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Jess.
Oh, no, go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, along that same vein, there is a question that's in the Q&A. What would be some best methods and venues for recruiting veterans to research studies?
I'm not sure. I don't have I'll tell you what worked for us. And unfortunately, I'm not sure it can be replicated very well or easily. Let's say it that way. We were able to partner with the VA who gets everyone who's transitioning out. And then we went to those folks, sent a letter with a crisp $5 bill in and said, we're doing a non-VA study, which to Mark's point gets at the trust. I hate to say that, but there are some veterans that are not trusting the VA at this point. So we have to own that to participate. And then we paid them quite a bit. But I will say they've stuck. We had to actually start cutting the survey off in waves 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 because we just didn't have the money. But once they got in and saw some of the implications, we kept in touch with them and let them know some of what was happening. That played a good role. But in general, I think to Mark's point about identity, they need to feel like they're helping their brothers and sisters who are going to come after them to some degree, but you also have to figure out a way to make sure that they know their information is valued. It's not a great answer. I wish I had the magic answer to it, but I don't. Mark, any thoughts?
No, I don't. I think money you touched on, I think that's part of it. I think, folks can try things like the Legion, VFW, and dedicated veteran communities. But it's a very, very fair question. I got a direct question from Suzanne. If I could read that, is that okay, Jess? Yeah, because I think it's a great.
Absolutely, please.
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question, Suzanne. It says, are you looking at differences? And Danny, this would really, I'm going to flip this one to you. That's why I'm reading it out loud. Are you looking at differences in veterans who grew up in military families and spent essentially their whole formative life with the military? And if they join, do they face a greater difficulty transitioning and acclimating to civilian life? Is there research looking at the pipeline of children of military members to veterans who then subsequently enter the civilian world?
So first of all, I love Mark, please send that question to me because we can actually answer it. We've not answered it. So we do know who in our sample came from a military connected family, if you will. And we could look at that. I will say two other things. So there is data that the most likely people to join the military come from a military family. It's about 38 to 42%. But having said that, in the last 20 years, we are seeing significant changes to the view of the military. And in fact, came out this week from Mark, what's it called? Military Spouse organization. That's not the name. It's something with military spouse. Apologize. But they do a survey every year and they are showing that this is the lowest support for their partner to stay in the military that we've ever seen this year's survey. And I think my own opinion is if this stuff doesn't change soon, we are looking, then I'm not being dramatic here. I think we're looking at conscription coming into play at some point in time. So I do think we have to think through how do we make sure we are, and I tried to do that a little bit in the presentation. How do we make sure that, yeah, of course, there's some challenges with being in the military, but there's also some serious benefits. And we saw that with home ownership. We saw that with education. But we need to figure that out because no one met their recruiting requirements this year. In fact, most of them fell way short of their recruiting requirements. So probably not the message folks wanted to hear. So, but we do know that, yeah, it's about 38% of military families, the children of military families join the military, which is the best predictor we have at this point.
Thanks, Danny. Mark, did you have anything to add for that one?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would flip it over to the medical side of the house. We did some work on who's actually eligible to join the military. And with the changing physiognomy of the American population, fewer and fewer people are actually fit to fight. And that's just a harsh reality of the American demographic.
Thank you, Mark. So I think we have time for probably one more question. There's so many great comments going on. So I really want to thank everyone for your participation. And obviously, I think it's reflective of the wonderful presentations we were fortunate enough to have today from Dr. Stevens and Dr. Perkins. Sorry, Mark and Danny. Force of habit. One last question. Concetta, I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. I think this might have been cancer, but do you capture ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, among service members at Wave 1?
Yeah, and Cheddar, I don't know if you're throwing me a softball, but thank you. It's good to hear from you. Just to say real quickly, we have several papers out. Part of this broken veteran thing that really bothers me is people are just looking for a quick answer, right? And what we know is that it's not people come to the military with baggage, good and bad, by the way. What we know is folks that have 3 or more ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and experience combat exposure, or actually in the combat, or just witnessing the combat, are, in our data, if you're a female, you're 9 times more likely to have mental health issues. And if you're a male, you're 7 times more likely. And then if you add military sexual trauma to that, you have a trifecta, which gets you to about you're 12 times more likely to have mental health issues. So it's really not fair for the American public to say, oh, people in the military are going to come out. No, you got to understand the baggage we all bring and how that interacts with some of the experiences we may have in the context of the military. And I think we do a really, quite frankly, piss poor job of understanding that interaction. Thank you, Concetta. Good to see you.
It wasn't a softball question. It was actually because so Danny and I used to work together. And now I actually work for the state of New Jersey in court improvement among different foster youth programs. And a lot of the things that we see in military data, I find, and it's probably just because of the background of having worked for the clearinghouse, there's a lot of parallel with the way that youth exit the foster care system and the things that they're experiencing. And so I was curious to know if there were any like ACEs that were being measured, and I'm going to bother you later, Danny, and we'll chat.
Sure. Thanks for that. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks, Concetta, for that wonderful question. Such an important topic to consider and think about. Before we start to transition to finishing up today, I just want to thank Danny and Mark so much for your incredible input and knowledge and willingness to share with our group today. It really is very it's an emotional topic, I think, and I think it's a beautiful thing when we can bring that into a topic about folks that oftentimes, we don't think of necessarily in an emotional kind of way, I guess. I hope that makes sense. But thank you so, so much from the bottom of my heart, I know, and I think from everybody who's here today. Did anybody have anything else that they wanted to add before we close out? Any other questions real quick or comments? You can put those in the chat. We do have on the screen here some resources that will be sent to all of you along with the other the session materials today. Let's see here. We do have a call to action in the chat. If everybody would like to write something that they learned by attending today's session, that would be fantastic. And then we do have a Zoom poll that we're going to put up real quick. How likely are you to be more inclusive of veterans in your research? So if you want to answer that really quickly, that would be great. I know some folks are not researchers necessarily on the call today, and that's okay. You can just skip this one if that's the case. Great. So we have a good amount of folks saying that they would be interested in working with veterans in research, which is awesome. Thank you for that. And finally, I do just want to thank everyone again for being here today. If anybody has any questions for future educational programming or suggestions that you would like to see the CEnR program sponsor, we would love that. We do try to listen to our participants and guide our session topics based on the feedback that we are getting. So we would really appreciate that. We will be starting another educational series in the fall. We'll be taking off for the summer, and we look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you so much, everyone.